An unexpected investigation. Nathan Carter sat in his high-rise office. The distant hum of traffic below, a stark contrast to the silence weighing heavy in the room. He flipped through a stack of anonymous complaints from employees claiming they weren't receiving their full wages, each letter a testament to growing frustration and despair. One, in particular, stood out a tear-stained note from a single father who had mysteriously lost half of his paycheck and was now on the verge of eviction. Nathan exhaled sharply, his gut tightening. Something wasn't right, and the more he read, the clearer it became. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a calculated scheme, and upper management's repeated assurances that everything was fine no longer held any weight. He had to find out the truth for himself. One letter in particular caught his attention, an emotional plea from a single father struggling to pay rent after mysteriously losing half of his paycheck. As the CEO of Carter Retail Group, Nathan had always prided himself on fairness and transparency, but this letter, along with a rising number of wage theft complaints, made it clear something was very wrong. And upper management's repeated assurances that everything was fine were no longer convincing. He had to find out the truth for himself. As the CEO of Carter Retail Group, he had always prided himself on fairness and transparency, but something wasn't right. Complaints about missing wages had been increasing over the past few months, and investigations from the HR department led nowhere. Employees were too afraid to speak up directly, and upper management assured him everything was running smoothly. Nathan knew there was only one way to get to the bottom of T. She needed to see it for himself. But doubt lingered in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if this was all a misunderstanding, a clerical error rather than deliberate theft? And if he did uncover corruption, how far would he need to go to fix it? He weighed the risks. If his cover was blown, he could face backlash, not just from the managers involved, but from employees who might see him as an intruder rather than an ally. For a brief moment, he considered alternatives and internal investigation, hiring an external auditor, but he knew none of those options would reveal the unfiltered truth. Despite the uncertainty, he set his jaw. There was no turning back. He had to see it with his own eyes. But going undercover wasn't without risks. If he got caught, it could cause massive disruptions, spark distrust among his employees, and even jeopardize his leadership. Would the warehouse managers retaliate if they found out? Would employees trust him once they learned his true identity? Despite the uncertainties, Nathan knew he had no choice. He had to go in and experience the reality of his company firsthand. That's when he made a bold decision. He would go undercover as a warehouse worker to investigate firsthand. Going undercover, disguised in a plain uniform, wearing a fake name tag reading Nick, and with minimal makeup to dull his well-groomed CEO image, Nathan stepped into one of his company's busiest warehouses. The environment was bustling with activity workers unloading shipments, organizing goods, and processing deliveries. But there was something else he quickly noticed. The atmosphere felt tense, almost fearful. Nathan took time to observe his surroundings, noticing that employees avoided eye contact with their supervisors, kept their heads down, and barely engaged in conversation. It wasn't just the fast-paced nature of the job. There was an air of apprehension hanging over the workplace, as if everyone was afraid of making a mistake. His supervisor for the day was Steve Reynolds, a middle-aged man with a calculating gaze and an air of authority that screamed intimidation. From the moment they were introduced, Nathan could tell that Steve enjoyed his position of power. His tone was sharp, dismissive, and condescending. The moment Nathan hesitated while learning a task, Steve barked at him. "New guy, pick up the pace. We don't have time for slow learners here." Within an hour, Nathan saw how Steve operated. Employees weren't just overworked, they were being systematically shortchanged. Michael, a veteran employee, confided that his paycheck was consistently lower than what he actually worked for. Lisa, a single mother, had been scheduled fewer hours without explanation, making her ineligible for company benefits. New hires were being tricked into working overtime without pay, under the guise of training hours. Some employees who complained about their pay were suddenly reassigned to undesirable shifts or given physically exhausting tasks as retaliation. Steve frequently intimidated workers by making veiled threats about job security, implying that anyone who spoke up would be replaced. Nathan played along, performing his tasks while secretly taking mental notes. He quickly realized Steve wasn't just making mistakes, she was deliberately altering payroll records, pocketing the difference, and manipulating the system to his advantage. As Nathan continued to work, he overheard Steve having a conversation with another supervisor. "Cutting wages here, and their adds up fast," Steve laughed. "Management doesn't notice, and the workers? Well, they can't afford to make a fuss." Nathan clenched his fists. This wasn't just a case of poor management. It was outright exploitation. Wage theft is a massive issue in the United States, with millions of workers losing billions of dollars annually due to underpayment, unpaid overtime, and payroll fraud. Many employees, especially those in low-wage jobs, fear retaliation if they speak out, and companies often rely on this fear to continue unethical practices. Nathan knew that if he didn't take action, these workers would continue suffering in silence just like countless others across the country. And the worst part? Steve wasn't acting alone. A network of corrupt managers seemed to be involved in covering up wage theft across multiple warehouse locations. Determined to get the full picture, Nathan befriended some of the workers, gaining their trust and hearing their stories. Many of them lived paycheck to paycheck and had families to support. For them, missing even a few hours of pay meant struggling to put food on the table. That night, as he reviewed his notes, Nathan knew one thing. He had seen enough. It was time for action. The evidence piles up. Over the next week, Nathan documented everything meticulously. He realized that Steve's corruption was not just a small oversight, it was a well-oiled machine designed to exploit workers while covering its tracks. Nathan knew that to take Steve down, he needed undeniable proof. Covertly recording conversations where Steve pressured employees to stay silent. Nathan strategically placed a voice recorder in his locker and carried another in his pocket. Over multiple shifts, he captured Steve intimidating workers, warning them against complaining about their wages, taking photos of manipulated payroll records and falsified time logs. Nathan noticed discrepancies between the digital records employees could access and the internal system managers used. Every night, he snapped photos of time logs that had been altered after workers had clocked out, deducting hours without their knowledge, gathering testimony from employees who had been bullied into compliance. Nathan discreetly spoke with dozens of workers, learning how Steve's tactics had affected them. Many feared speaking up, worried they would be fired or reassigned to the most grueling shifts. Some even admitted they had stopped checking their paychecks because they had lost hope in the system. One afternoon, Nathan overheard Steve laughing with another manager, boasting about how much money he had saved the company by cutting corners. "Payroll reductions are the easiest way to keep the books looking good," Steve smirked. "It's not like these guys have the money for a lawyer. They'll grumble for a few weeks, then just accept it." Nathan clenched his jaw, barely restraining himself from calling Steve out right then and there. But he knew patience was key. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. He discovered that Steve had even set up a performance deduction policy where he falsely documented minor mistakes to justify cutting employee wages. Workers who made a single error, such as mislabeling a shipment or taking an extra 5 minutes on their break, found themselves docked pay without warning. Nathan also noticed something even more disturbing. Several employees had mysteriously disappeared from the warehouse after making formal complaints. After some digging, he learned that Steve had arranged to have outspoken workers transferred to other locations far from their homes, forcing many to quit due to the increased commute. It was a calculated move to silence dissent while maintaining plausible deniability. The final piece of evidence fell into place when Nathan overheard Steve bragging to an outsider, an accountant who had helped him cover his tracks. "It's a numbers game," Steve said confidently. "A few missing dollars per paycheck spread across hundreds of employees. It adds up to a nice bonus at the end of the quarter." Nathan had heard enough. It wasn't just wage theft, it was systemic abuse. And he was about to bring it all crashing down. The confrontation. Nathan had seen enough. It was time to put an end to Steve's corruption. The next morning, he arrived at work as usual, but this time, he wasn't in disguise. Dressed in his tailored suit, Nathan walked straight into the warehouse office where Steve was casually sipping coffee, oblivious to what was about to unfold. "Steve, we need to talk," Nathan said firmly, stepping into the room. Steve barely looked up. "Yeah? What's it about, rookie?" Nathan smirked. "First off, my name's not Nick. It's Nathan Carter, and I'm the CEO of this company." A heavy silence filled the room. Steve's coffee cup clattered against the desk as his hand trembled. His face paled, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that wouldn't come. The weight of realization hit him like a freight train. Employees outside the office, who had gathered out of curiosity, stood frozen in shock. Some exchanged glances, while others held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Steve's face drained of color, his coffee cup shaking slightly in his hands. What? That's impossible." Nathan placed a thick file of evidence on the desk. "You've been stealing wages, manipulating payroll records, and intimidating employees into silence. I have all the proof I need." Steve stammered. "Listen, two can explain. It's just business. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to keep profits up." Nathan's expression hardened. "No, stealing from hardworking employees isn't just business. It's theft. And as of this moment, you're fired." As if on cue, two security guards entered the office, ready to escort Steve out. The disgraced supervisor tried to argue, but Nathan wasn't interested in hearing excuses. As Steve was led away, Nathan turned to the gathered employees. Some looked stunned, while others wore hesitant expressions of relief. "I want you all to hear this," Nathan said, his voice steady. "From now on, this company will operate with full transparency. No more stolen wages, no more intimidation. We're implementing a direct hotline for payroll discrepancies, and every manager will be held accountable for fair treatment. This company succeeds because of you, and you deserve to be treated with respect." For the first time in a long while, a sense of hope returned to the warehouse. The aftermath and lasting change. Nathan didn't stop at just firing Steve. He launched a full-scale audit across all company warehouses to ensure similar practices weren't happening elsewhere. What he discovered was even more alarming. Several warehouses had similar payroll inconsistencies, and managers had been using different tactics to siphon wages from employees. Some had been falsifying overtime records, while others had been pressuring employees into working off the clock under the guise of mandatory team meetings. Determined to overhaul the system entirely, Nathan implemented a series of sweeping changes. A digital payroll tracking system, accessible to employees to prevent any future tampering. This system ensured that every worker could cross-check their logged hours against their paychecks in real time, leaving no room for manipulation. A whistleblower protection program, encouraging workers to speak up without fear of retaliation. Nathan made it clear that any form of retaliation against whistleblowers would result in immediate termination. Mandatory ethics training for all managers. Every level of management was required to undergo extensive training in ethical leadership, employee rights, and wage law compliance. The creation of an anonymous complaint hotline, operated by an independent third party. This gave employees a direct line to report misconduct without fear of repercussions. A restructuring of warehouse leadership. Several managers, found complicit in the wage theft scheme, were dismissed. Nathan promoted honest, hardworking employees into leadership positions, ensuring that those who had suffered under the old system would have a hand in shaping the new one. A financial restitution program. Nathan ensured that every employee affected by past wage theft received back pay, with interest, as a form of reparations for the financial hardship they had endured. Quarterly workplace audits. Going forward, each warehouse would be audited 4 times a year to prevent any possibility of similar corruption reemerging. With these changes, Carter Retail Group not only regained the trust of its workers, but also became a leading example of ethical business practices. Employee morale improved, turnover rates dropped, and the company's reputation soared as workers shared their renewed faith in the company's leadership. The most rewarding part? Nathan began receiving letters and emails from employees, thanking him for taking action. Many expressed how they had once felt powerless, believing that no one in leadership cared about their struggles. Now, they knew they had a CEO who truly had their backs. Nathan's actions proved a critical lesson. Real leadership isn't about sitting in a boardroom, making decisions. It's about stepping into the trenches, seeing the reality of the workplace, and making meaningful changes that improve the lives of those who depend on you. His approach aligned with core American workplace values: fairness, accountability, and ethical leadership. By taking decisive action, Nathan reinforced the idea that businesses thrive when they treat employees with dignity and respect, ensuring that hard work is met with honest compensation and an equitable work environment. One worker, Michael, who had been with the company for over a decade, finally saw justice. After years of being overlooked and underpaid, he was promoted to a supervisory role under the company's new leadership structure. For the first time in years, "I feel like my work actually matters," he said in a heartfelt letter to Nathan. Lisa, the single mother who had been struggling with reduced hours, saw her schedule restored and finally received the back pay she was owed. "I can finally breathe again," she told her coworkers. Stories like these echoed throughout the company, proving that real change was more than just policy. It was about rebuilding trust and restoring hope. His approach aligned with core American workplace values: fairness, accountability, and ethical leadership. By taking decisive action, Nathan reinforced the idea that businesses thrive when they treat employees with dignity and respect, ensuring that hard work is met with honest compensation and an equitable work environment. What can we learn from Nathan Carter's story? Nathan Carter's journey is more than just a compelling story. It's a wake-up call for leaders, employees, and businesses everywhere. His experience teaches us crucial lessons about leadership, integrity, and the importance of taking action against workplace injustice. This isn't just about one company or one corrupt manager. It's about a much larger issue that affects millions of people. Across the U.S., wage theft and unethical labor practices occur more often than we think, with billions of dollars lost each year to unfair deductions, unpaid overtime, and manipulative corporate policies. Nathan's story sheds light on a reality that many workers face but feel powerless to change. It also reminds us that leadership is not just about sitting in an office making high-level decisions. The best leaders are those who step into the trenches, understand the challenges their employees face, and take meaningful action to create a fair and just workplace. His journey proves that real change is possible when someone is willing to stand up against wrongdoing, even if it means taking risks. Beyond just being a story of workplace justice, Nathan's experience speaks to the universal need for accountability, ethical leadership, and employee rights. It challenges all of us to consider: how do we contribute to a better work culture? Are we ensuring fairness in our own workplaces? Are we willing to take a stand when we see injustice? Key takeaways. True leadership requires action, not just words. Nathan didn't just sit behind a desk and listen to reports. He took a risk, went undercover, and exposed corruption firsthand. Real leaders don't just talk about making changes. They take decisive steps to create them. Workplace fairness is a necessity, not a privilege. Many employees in the U.S. and worldwide face wage theft, unfair treatment, and workplace intimidation. This story reminds us that fair wages, ethical leadership, and a respectful work environment should be the standard, not the exception. Exposing corruption takes courage. Standing up against injustice is never easy. Nathan faced potential backlash, distrust, and the possibility of failure, but he knew that staying silent would only allow corruption to continue. Small actions lead to big changes. One person choosing to act can spark change. Nathan's investigation led to widespread policy reforms, financial restitution for employees, and a better work environment for everyone. His actions show that change begins with one brave decision. What does this mean for you? If you're a leader, ensure transparency and fairness in your workplace. If you're an employee, know your rights and never be afraid to speak up against unfair treatment. If you've experienced workplace injustice, Remember that change starts when people refuse to stay silent. Join the conversation and make a difference. At Toch Story, we share powerful narratives that inspire action, challenge injustice, and highlight the importance of ethical leadership. If you found Nathan's story compelling, there's more where that came from. Subscribe to Toch Story today and never miss a story that could change your perspective on leadership, justice, and accountability. Leave a comment. Have you ever witnessed or experienced workplace unfairness? How do you think companies should handle wage theft and corruption? Let's start a conversation. Like, share, and spread the message because the world needs more leaders like Nathan Carter. Turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch our latest videos on leadership, justice, and real-world lessons. Change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement for workplace fairness and ethical leadership. Subscribe now to Toch Story and be inspired by real stories that make a difference.